Thank you, Program Director. Elias Monachie, the President of SEIFSA. Kaiser Nyatsumba, the CEO. Deputy Minister Majola, the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry. Deputy Minister Maswale, the Deputy Minister of Public Enterprises. Executive members of SEIFSA, officials from government who are present today, distinguished delegates and guests, a warm good morning to you. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you and make a few remarks at this 5th Metals and Engineering Indaba. And thank you also for reorganizing your program to make it possible for the deputy ministers and myself to be with you this morning. I recall my last address to a SEIFSA conference in September 2017. It was 3 months prior to the ANC's National Elective Conference. Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa was Deputy President at the time. The country was anxiously waiting for the results of the ANC elective conference, and I remember how it had largely overshadowed so much of the discussion, even in your own conference. Only 27 billion rand of foreign direct investment flowed into South Africa that year. And in the same month, the Springboks lost 57-0 to the All Blacks in Albany, the biggest test match defeat in our history. Things have certainly changed since then and certainly gotten better. And certainly on the Springbok front, in this month, we'll be taking on the All Blacks in our opening match at the World Cup. Last year, the new president, Ramaphosa, called for a united effort to secure some 1.2 trillion rand of fresh investment over the next 5 years. And in the year that he made the announcement, our foreign direct investment showed a large uptick with 71 billion rand in new investment flows for the year. And pledges were made by major local and domestic investors to commit 300 billion over the next 5 years as an important step to realizing our goal. I make this point because context matters and memories are short, and we see the challenges that faces us today and we forget the challenges we confronted and resolved yesterday. And so context is vital if we develop the capacity and the ability to move forward in a society. This is a conference of steel people. So let me turn to matters of the industry. Southern Africa is home to the most advanced metal and engineering capability on the African continent. And you and your businesses are critical to the region's economic prospects, and you're the bedrock of industrialization. If we seek to grow our GDP, we can only do so through expanding the productive sectors of our economy. No country has ever shopped itself to wealth. So Santon, please, the mall is great, but that's not the way in which you create wealth. It's in the foundries, it's in the metal factories, it's in the iron ore mines that wealth is created. So for that reason, metal and engineering is the foundation for your products are found across every part of the productive economy. In South Africa, the broader metal and engineering sectors, which include primary steel production, the automotive sector, electrical machinery and fabricated metals, account for about a quarter of manufacturing output, generating more than 155 billion rands worth of wealth and constituting nearly 4% of GDP. The output from South Africa's metal and engineering sector, let me give you some comparator just to see how important the broader sector. I'm not looking specifically and only to the SEIFSA area, but the sector as a whole. That sector is bigger than the entire output of a country like Albania, or a country like Malta, or Burkina Faso, or indeed Madagascar. The sector now employs more than 460,000 people in South Africa, with the largest numbers of jobs in the automotive, machinery and equipment manufacture and in metal fabrication. But the sector is faced with serious and immediate challenges, including global excess capacity, particularly in China, and the global trade war battles in which steel plays a leading role. In December 2016, the G20, which brings together some of the most significant economies in the world and which South Africa is a partner of, or a member of, created a global forum on steel excess capacity. That forum brings together 33 countries. You could basically say anyone making steel. They represent over 90% of steel making capabilities in the world. And their job was to try to find multilateral solutions to this massive overhang of excess steel. They have not yet found solutions, and it impacts greatly on the South African economy because a part of that excess capacity finds its way back into the local market. But these challenges are not insurmountable, and if we navigate them well, we can enable the industry to grow. But it will take extraordinary partnerships, lots of hard work, a very different mindset from all of us, as steelmakers, workers, government, if we are to grow during the storms. So we can't wish we had no storms globally. The storms are there. We must navigate in those storms. If we do so successfully, the world is open to us. We have choices. We can revert to the low road, point fingers at each other, bemoan the lack of leadership in another constituency, or we can aspire to the high road, pull up our sleeves, recognize we can all do better, each of us, and we need to do better. Focus on what's doable and practical, make sacrifices, up our collective game, and while it's tough to do so, there are enormous rewards when we succeed. It means starting a new positive narrative, not waiting for another constituency to do so. Government can't wait for business to be positive about the future. It starts with us. Business can't wait for labor to be positive about the future. It starts with you. Organized labor can't wait for government to be positive about the future. It starts with it. It recognizes that each constituency must lead in our respective spheres to build a positive industry storyline. President Ramaphosa spoke about a reimagined industrial strategy in his inaugural SONA address of the new administration. And he says this is going to be one of the centerpieces of rebuilding the economy with master plans in different sectors. Now, this requires us to refocus industrial strategy as a central pillar of economic recovery. You can't ask for a bigger stage and a more important moment than the inaugural State of the Nation address of the incoming president to say an industry matters and we are going to focus on doing the right thing. It means doing things differently, though. It's about good ideas, but in the context of South Africa, it's perhaps even more importantly about good implementation. 3 weeks ago, I met with industry stakeholders in the metal and engineering value chain to begin working towards a master plan for the sector. It was a robust, open meeting with a number of views expressed on the challenges and opportunities for the sector, but it highlighted the passion that many have to drive growth, development, and jobs in the industry. This meeting room was packed. There was no place for people who wanted to come in. We had to turn down requests for more people who wanted to come because our venue just couldn't hold the number of steelmakers who wanted to be present in a conversation about the future. I left that meeting encouraged by the commitment that was expressed to rebuild the sector. Commitment from across the business value chain, commitment. There were 2 trade unions there, and they said, we back this process, we prepare to support this, we recognize we need to do things differently. Stakeholders were given an opportunity to submit proposals on what could assist growth in the industry, and also what they would be prepared to bring to the table to achieve that growth. To date, we've received nearly 40 submissions from individual businesses, associations, and unions. I will be appointing a facilitator to engage stakeholders shortly on the submissions and on the content of the master plan so that we can finalize a working draft as soon as possible. The master plan must be action-oriented. It must be implementable. It's not going to be a 400-page document. It's going to be short. I hope it will set out a crisp set of action plans which each party can carry out. What do we need from the metal industry? What do we need from organized labor? What do we need from government? So that everybody knows what they must bring and what they can take back. I spoke at that forum about this being like a bring and braai. And in any great braai, there are no free riders. You don't come to the bring and braai hoping to criticize how the meat is cooked and what the selection of drinks are. You come with your pack also, what I am going to bring. And your job in that bring and braai as government, your job in that bring and braai as business, and your job in that bring and braai as labor is to make it a great success. In the time I have here today, I want to outline a number of ideas of focus which will have a direct and material impact on the metals and engineering sectors. First, we've identified the need to improve industrial performance, dynamism, and competitiveness of local companies in the sector. Government's role in this process is facilitative and enabling, and to ensure that all the tools in the public toolbox helps to achieve this goal. How to build a competitive, dynamic, agile sector. Through the master plan, government reaffirms its commitment to the sector. Already the IDC, which is the host today of this event, has revised its criteria for the 1.5 billion rand downstream steel competitiveness fund, which will provide greater access at better interest rates for a large number of businesses in the sector. The Department of Trade, Industry and Competition is also establishing a metals fabrication support program which will provide grants of up to 30 million rand to qualifying foundries and mini mills. And these will be part of the new master plan. In addition, a new auto master plan aims by 2035 to increase local content sharply from 39%, where it is at the moment, to 60%. That provides a substantial opportunity for the entire metals value chain, particularly steel, which constitutes more than half the weight of the average vehicle. There's also opportunities for companies in the fabrication of aluminium products. It will be important for the metal and engineering industry to engage with their auto counterparts and seek ways to increase localization and local value add. There are commitments in the mining charter published in September last year. They're taking transformation and localization in the supply chain very seriously in mining. Under the charter, a minimum of 70% of goods procured must be South African manufactured goods. Only mining goods with a 60% or greater local value add will be considered South African manufactured. And we're doing this because we want to add more value to local raw materials so that more wealth and more jobs are generated in the process and stays in South Africa, providing opportunity for South Africans. And it means greater incentives and support for downstream processing industries, what we call greater beneficiation. If implemented well, this creates further opportunities for sectors in the region as a whole. Localization is a key pillar of South Africa's industrial strategy. Designation by government in rail and water segments has resulted in increased demand for local steel. Companies have come to us and said, we appreciate what has been done here. We've managed to land this order. We've done so because now there is a designation that this particular product has to be procured locally. This designation has also supported the restarting of Highveld Steel following a period of business rescue for the company. It's now Africa's only manufacturer of rail lines, and Deputy Minister Maswale and Minister Gordon, who are both responsible for Transnet, are strong allies in making sure that we localize more of the rail manufacturing. We recognize the enormous cost to the economy and to the integrity of our systems of government when we procure trains from other parts of the world, not only in all likelihood more expensive than South Africa could have made it, but not fit for purpose and not creating local jobs and local economic opportunities. And we're fixing that now. When I spoke last at the SEIFSA conference, Highveld Steel had been restarted and it had been turned into an industrial and services hub. And I reported at your 2017 conference that there were just over 600 workers in the Highveld hub. That number is now 1,150 people employed in the Highveld Industrial Park. So just consistently working. Not all of it is in steel making, it's in a series of services and support activities, but it's taken something that was going to be a rust dump and rejuvenated it, brought fresh energy and commitment and jobs in the area. Another example is in the manufacture of minibus taxis and buses. About 8 years ago, South Africa imported all of its minibus taxis and all of the buses that were being used for the public transport system. So we said, let's be practical about this. Making a speech saying how great localization is doesn't change things. You've got to just roll up sleeves, take off jacket, get things moving. Made a phone call to Toyota, said to Johan van Zyl, you want to come over to Pretoria, we serve a good coffee. I wasn't completely honest about that, but he did come. I did serve him the coffee, and we talked. At the end of the conversation, we shook hands, we reached an agreement on what we think we can do. It took a bit of time now to get processes aligned. I wrote a letter to Toyota Global indicating our desire that minibus taxis should be manufactured in South Africa. Johan worked closely with me, and he did the hard lifting which needs to be done inside the company. End of story. Toyota then opens up a minibus taxi manufacturing capability. A Chinese company hears about it and says, put up our hand, can we also come in? The IDC meets with them and said, okay, here are the terms. They come in, it's called BAW, they open up a taxi assembly plant. Result of all of this is we've now assembled more than 80,000 minibus taxis locally here in South Africa. So most taxis you see now on the road are actually locally manufactured. And all the new ones that you're seeing are locally manufactured. In addition to that, we looked at the buses. I went to visit facilities in South Africa. I saw we had capabilities. We then, through the Department of Trade and Industry, we put in a designation that says, if in your Rea Vaya system, your Arieleng, in your systems, My City in Cape Town, all of these use local buses. And instead of importing buses from Brazil, we will look at whether we need to do that on soccer players, but instead of buses, manufacture them locally. And to date, 750 buses have been assembled here in South Africa. And each bus has been produced with 80% local content. So it's not just the assembly, but also enormously high local content requirement that we've set. And while we've spent a lot of time on designation, getting the legal systems in place, and focusing on a few key areas of used buses and taxis, we've asked the department, in the period ahead, focus a lot more on monitoring that the law is being applied and that the implementation is effective. Because we've got the framework in place. And now it's tightening the nuts and bolts and just making sure every time Transnet does a tender that it says there what the requirement is. Every time a municipality does a tender on water pipes, that the localization requirement is there. And we are committed also to ensure that there are consequences in the public sector for non-adherence to the new laws. Another pillar of our industrial strategy is to develop new investment clusters through special economic zones, revitalizing industrial sites, and business and digital hubs. Deputy Minister Majola is leading an enormous part of the work in Gauteng on rebuilding capability and ensuring that we have industrial opportunities and industrial sites here. A special economic zone is being under consideration, which will supply components for the automotive industry in Gauteng. And we'll make that announcement, we hope, by November. That would give some further clarity of how we're going to deepen industrialization in this area and take already a success story. We produce about 600,000 motor vehicles every year. We're Africa's largest auto manufacturing capability. Technology will increasingly reshape your industry too. To respond to the pressures of the fourth industrial revolution, we will need a Steel 4.0 plan to harness the new digital technologies, the smart robotics, the algorithms, the drones, the Internet of Things. All of these technologies will reshape not other parts of the economy, but also the steel industry. The future will be characterized by innovation. This wave will not leave any industry unaffected. It may be the development of new materials that will challenge traditional steel with more flexible, stronger, and thinner materials. It will be that climate change pressures will result in greater use of electric cars and new battery storage technologies. So the world that we knew, the world of the 20th century, is being transformed. What we know is that steel and its derivatives will continue to play a key role, but what that role will be, how steel will change, the manufacture of steel, the components of steel, all of those, the world waits for innovation, for new ideas to come in, and we need to make sure South Africa is positioned not to be left on the side in all of this, but to be an active part of shaping this new world of the future. Which brings me to my second point, which is to expand markets for our products and facilitate entry to those markets. The single biggest initiative is the African Continental Free Trade Area, which will connect 1.2 billion people into a single trade bloc and lay the basis for increased intra-African trade, and it will cement the continent's position as the next growth frontier. It will reshape our economy. Already exports to other African countries account for some 250,000 direct South African jobs. Very significant. And there is enormous opportunity, but it will require hard work before the free trade area comes into effect in July next year. Let me just take your industry, the steel industry and its derivatives, which is key to infrastructure development. It has been estimated by the World Economic Forum that the gap in Africa's annual infrastructure investment is about $100 billion US. That's very significant. It's about 5 times the size of our own infrastructure program. That means roughly 5 times the amount of steel that is currently consumed in South Africa, from all the companies in your industry, from all the imports that we get from China and elsewhere into South Africa, you add all of that steel and all the components together, you put it on a massive dump, and you look at the dump and you say, 5 times that quantity will be required just for Africa's additional infrastructure needs every year for the next number of years if we are to realize fully the growth opportunity that there is. Or put it another way, the demand for additional steel, if this program is fully realized, may be as high as 140 billion rand per annum. We have iron ore. We have steel making capabilities. We have metal fabrication capacities. We are Africa's most advanced steel and metal industry without question. But we cannot rely on reputation. We need a practical plan to unlock this opportunity. For that is what it is, an opportunity, not a guarantee. A guarantee is something you stand back, it will happen, whatever you do. An opportunity is different. An opportunity is a gap. If you can get your act together as a country, and you grab that opportunity, you realize it. Last month, I established a national committee comprising business, labor, and government to develop action plans around the AFC FTA. Each industry will be required to assess the opportunity and threats presented and begin working towards a plan that will result in us grabbing those opportunities. It's a very practical thing. It's not our hopes. It's things like what credit export support is needed. How do we ensure payment systems that if you export steel or widgets to the DRC, that the payment systems work well, that money is transmitted back into your bank account in South Africa? How practically to deal with exchange rate issues, what currencies do we use, and exchange rate risk. Sort out logistics, which ports are we going to use, which rail lines, which roads, what are the border inspection systems, which countries are undertaking infrastructure programs, how can we develop an all-in comprehensive solution where we provide financing, technical support, and inputs into the industry. Now, I've spoken about the African opportunity, but there are also opportunities in other parts of the world. And there's also opportunities in our domestic base. So ITAC has taken action in more than 40 instances in the last 5 years to support companies in the sector. More than 40 actions in one sector is unusually high. If you're looking for proof of the support government is giving, those are the kind of metrics of action to support local industry to back you. These actions have included anti-dumping duties, safeguard measures, tariff increases, tariff rebates, and extension of the price preference system on scrap metal. And the impact of these interventions has resulted, among others, in a 60% reduction in the volumes of Chinese imports of flat-rolled products. I want to talk for a moment about the price preference system, which has resulted in a 70% decrease in ferrous scrap exports, an 80% reduction in copper scrap exports, and the 35% reduction in aluminium scrap, ensuring some degree of security of supply for foundries and mini mills reliant on scrap at preferential prices. And the scrap exporters took us to court when we did this. Took us to the Gauteng High Court, we won the case. They then ran to the Western Cape, took us to the Western Cape High Court, we won the case. They appealed to the Supreme Court of Appeal, we won the case. They petitioned the Constitutional Court to ask for a declarative that our decision was unconstitutional. We prevailed and the Constitutional Court dismissed the matter. That's the kind of commitment that your government gives the industry, our industry, we partners in this, to ensure we do things together. And in a submission made to government during the extension of the price preference system, one company commented, and I quote, in a few minutes, I'm not going to quote all of them, the existence of Agni Steel and its 288 employees was solely due to the implementation of the price preference system policy. And I know Deputy Minister Maswale from the Eastern Cape is a strong backer of us industrializing the Eastern Cape. SEIFSA itself made a submission to government on behalf of industry and its state, and I quote SEIFSA, the PPS is fundamental to the success of Hulaman used beverage can recycling project in Maritzburg and Agni Mini Steel Mill in Kucha. It is our firm belief that the elapsing of the PPS guidelines will deal a serious, if not devastating blow to the local industry. And there are many others. 3 weeks ago, I re-established a steel committee to monitor and make recommendations to ITAC on the impact of changes in import tariffs and trade remedy on primary steel prices to downstream users in the steel industry. The members of the committee are Johan Nel from the South African Iron and Steel Institute, Mr. Paulo Trinchero from the Southern African Institute of Steel Construction, Mr. Colin Houts from AMSA, Mr. Michael Aid from SEIFSA, Mr. Neil van Niekerk from the International Steel Fabricators, Mr. Ivan Jim from NUMSA, and Mr. Marius Krokam from Solidarity. The new Steel Committee held its first meeting yesterday here at the IDC, and I look forward to the report from the engagement in due course. To improve enforcement of trade interventions, the SARS has established a task team to tackle illegal imports and exports. The work on illegal exports of scrap metal has already had a positive impact. We've caught containers which were misdeclared, and we've already observed 2 companies in your sector have advised us that they've observed a 500 to 600 rand ton fall in the price of scrap metal since SARS stepped up its intervention efforts in mid-July. Now, why do I take a small example like that in a speech here today? Is to say that the new focus of government is not to make ringing, broad policy statements. Is to say, let's focus on implementation. Let's do the things that we've always said we're going to do, but for whatever reasons have not been done properly. Let's get down to practical implementation. The problem is illegal exports. Begin to put together the team, work on it, monitor it, see that we do the right thing. Which brings me to the third area, which is to improve the level of investment in the sector. And there I will briefly comment on the fact that the President is hosting the second investment conference from 5 to 7 November this year. Last year, commitments were made of 300 billion rand. Many of these were in greenfield or brownfield projects that will drive the demand for steel, fabricated metals, and engineering services. The IDC, which is hosting this conference, supports, through its investment portfolio, the sector. In the last 5 years, the IDC has approved about 20 billion rand to companies in the automotive, metal fabrication, and engineering sector. It's helped to create or retain 23,500 jobs in the sector. The public sector has invested 1.3 trillion rand in infrastructure in the last 5 years. For the last 2, perhaps 3 years, the fiscal challenges has constrained our ability to be able to do the robust infrastructure investment that the country needs. And so, and that's been aggravated by the challenges of state capture and corruption. To help improve the levels of investment in infrastructure, President Ramaphosa announced a 100 billion rand new infrastructure fund, which will also draw money from the private sector and from development finance institutions. So its true value will be significantly higher. The BRICS New Development Bank has worked with us to provide funding for infrastructure projects, with 22 billion rand in funding allocated earlier this year. It includes financing for Eskom's grid connection infrastructure for renewable energy, retrofitting the flue gas desulfurization equipment to make Medupi compliant with South Africa's environmental standards, for Transnet to increase capacity and upgrade the infrastructure of the Durban port, and for the TCTA, for the implementation of phase 2 of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, and for the IDC and the DBSA for on-lending for renewable energy projects. And we're now working with them for the next window, how to get an additional allocation of funding that can help to stimulate the achievement of higher growth and, of course, our investment targets. The fourth area of focus is greater economic inclusion and transformation, bringing more black South Africans, more young people, by the way, black and white young people, more women into the heart of manufacturing is not a social and political imperative only. It is a vital way of expanding the talent pool of the metal and engineering sector that we need to rely on. It's growing out timber for the next generation of people that will drive the sector. It means opening up our market structure through industrial funding and through competition policy. In 2015, I set targets for the IDC to fund a greater number of black industrialists and women and youth-empowered companies. Since then, the IDC has approved 6.5 billion rand for projects that are at least 50% owned and operated by black industrialists in metal and engineering. 2 billion has been approved for projects that are at least 25% owned by women in the sector. Nearly 650 million has been approved for projects that are at least 25% owned by youth under the age of 34 years, paving way for the sector's entrepreneurs of tomorrow. The Competition Commission has worked to address market structures in steel. In the last 5 years, it's investigated 13 mergers in the sector, and it's imposed conditions against rising levels of economic concentration and other anti-competitive conditions, and to save jobs as well. Big is not bad. South Africa needs big companies. If it wants to be a global player, if it wants to be the leading steel producer for the African continent, it needs large, strong companies. But strong companies and large companies must not exclude newer players, small and medium enterprises. If you look at one of the world's most successful steel industries, the German industry, its medium-sized businesses is the absolute driving force of that industry, bringing innovation and dynamism to Germany. In the last 5 years, the tribunal imposed significant penalties, 1.7 billion rand, on companies in this sector for anti-competitive behavior. And you will be familiar with the AMSA settlement with ArcelorMittal, a 1.5 billion rand fine, a commitment to invest 4.6 billion rand over a 5-year period, and to limit prices on flat steel products through an EBIT margin cap of 10%. We've now passed the new Competition Amendment Act. The President signed it into law. It provides greater clarity in the law of what is excessive pricing, predatory pricing, price discrimination, and abuse of buyer power. It will make it easier for SMEs to rely on functioning markets to access inputs into their businesses. It will enable larger companies to apply for exemptions to facilitate collaboration that will expand production and create jobs or assist South African companies to export. It will strengthen the power of the authorities to deal with anti-competitive conduct and market structures so that we expand the economic base of the country and increase the wealth of our nation. I want to end off with a fifth and final point, which is partnership. To address the challenges of the metal and engineering sector, we cannot rely on a single partner. Government must play its part. It must play it better. But government alone cannot provide the capital, the labor, and the expertise to grow the industry. It's the workers and the management in the workplace and the investors who bring the resources that does this. And we must reset and deepen those relationships. Government, as I noted in my introductory comment, is fundamentally an enabler, a facilitator. It brings something to the braai. Our regulatory power, resources, and partnering to address the infrastructure needs of the country. But to turn the industry into a high-growth, high-jobs industry, we need to unlock the energy and the enterprise of the sector itself, of the entrepreneurs, the managers, and the workers, to build a new platform, a new partnership. We'll provide the venue for the braai, and some of the implements that are needed. You need some of the things, the tools and so on, we'll bring that. But you need to bring something big as industry. And when I speak to the union movement, it will be the same message. Unions must bring something big. Each of us must bring something. Each of us must change the way in which we work. As you look at the opportunities and challenges which your industry faces in a world moving fast into the fourth industrial revolution, where the rules of the game are changing rapidly, it's important to focus on the role that individual investors, managers, and workers can play in developing an industry which is ready to forge new paths into the rest of the continent, to thrive off the growth of industries like the automotive sector, and to weather the new global storms which may come. South Africa has a history of resilience, of being able to do things against the grain, of taking the cynicism of the world and saying, we can do something great in our country. We have a moment now. The window has opened for us as a country to do this. We have this African Continental Free Trade Area. We have an economic partnership agreement with Europe. I announced yesterday that we've just reached an agreement with the UK on the terms of trade to Britain in the event of a no-deal Brexit. So the opportunities are there, and we are now going to be working harder to get our infrastructure program going. We need partners, you need partners, trade unions need partners. We need each other to rebuild this industry. Thank you very much for this opportunity to say a few words, and I wish you well with the rest of the conference.